Document. Part 6. The decision to keep studying the organism weighed heavily on the crew. Each of them carried their doubts and fears, but they also knew there was no turning back. The glowing mass in the lab had already proven itself intelligent, adaptive, and capable of learning at an alarming rate. Emily Carter remained convinced that communication was the key to understanding it, while Alex Reed's skepticism bordered on outright hostility. Jason Cole found himself caught in the middle, torn between caution and curiosity. As the hours passed, the organism continued to evolve its behavior. It mimicked gestures with increasing accuracy, responded to verbal commands, and even began forming more complex shapes patterns that suggested a rudimentary form of expression. At one point, when Emily asked it to show her something new, the glowing mass split into smaller tendrils that wove together like threads, creating what looked like a three-dimensional lattice. The structure pulsed rhythmically, almost like a heartbeat. Jason watched in silence, his arms crossed as he leaned against the wall. "What do you think it means?" he asked finally, breaking the quiet. Emily tilted her head, studying the pulsating lattice. "I'm not sure. It could be symbolic, a representation of how it connects or interacts with other things. Or maybe it's just experimenting, testing its own limits." Alex groaned from his position near the door where he'd been keeping watch. "This is getting us nowhere. All we're doing is feeding its ego, or whatever passes for an ego in a blob. We need to figure out how to contain it permanently before it figures out how to break free again. Can't just lock it up and forget about it," Emily argued, frustration creeping into her voice. "It's trying to communicate with us. Ignoring that would be a mistake. Letting it roam free would be suicide." Alex shot back. "Saw what happened last time? One wrong move and it'll spread through the entire ship." Jason stepped forward, raising a hand to stop the argument before it escalated. "Enough. Both of you have valid points, but arguing won't solve anything. For now, we focus on gathering information. If we understand how it operates, we'll have a better chance of controlling it." Emily nodded reluctantly, though her eyes still burned with determination. She turned back to the organism, speaking slowly and clearly. "Can you show me how you survive? What do you need to live?" The glowing mass pulsed once, then reshaped itself into a flat, circular form. In the center of the circle, several lines branched outward, resembling roots digging into soil. The image shifted slightly, and small bursts of light appeared along the lines, as if illustrating energy being absorbed. "I think it's showing us how it feeds," Emily said, excitement creeping into her tone. "It absorbs energy, maybe heat, radiation, or even electricity. That explains why it reacted so strongly to the vibrations and sound waves earlier." Jason frowned, stepping closer to examine the shape. "If it feeds on energy, does that mean it could drain the ship's systems? Our power reserves?" "It's possible," Emily admitted, "but only if it has direct access to those systems. Right now, it's contained within this barrier. As long as we keep it isolated, it shouldn't pose a threat." Alex snorted derisively. "That's a big if. This thing has already escaped once. How do we know it won't find another way out?" "Don't," Jason said bluntly. "Which is why we reinforce the containment measures. Alex, see if you can rig up some kind of monitoring system, something that alerts us if it tries to breach the barrier again." "On it," Alex replied, grabbing a toolkit from the corner of the lab. He disappeared into the hallway, muttering under his breath about alien blobs and stupid risks. Once Alex was gone, Jason turned to Emily, lowering his voice. "Do you really believe this thing is harmless?" Emily hesitated, her gaze lingering on the glowing mass. "I don't think it's inherently dangerous, not yet, anyway. But it's incredibly powerful, and it learns quickly. If we mishandle this, it could become a threat." Jason nodded grimly. "Then we tread carefully. Keep pushing for answers, but stay alert. If it shows any sign of aggression, we act immediately." Meanwhile, Alex worked feverishly in the engineering bay, assembling a makeshift alarm system using spare sensors and wiring. His hands moved with practiced precision, but his mind raced with worst-case scenarios. Every creak of the ship's metal walls made him glance over his shoulder, half expecting to see the organism oozing toward him, by the time he returned to the lab. He had rigged a series of motion detectors and thermal scanners around the perimeter of the barrier. A small device attached to the wall emitted a steady green light, indicating that everything was secure for now. "There," Alex said, wiping sweat from his forehead. "If that thing so much as twitches in the wrong direction, we'll know." "About it," Emily gave him a grateful nod. "Thanks, Alex. I know you don't agree with this approach, but your help means a lot." Alex shrugged, avoiding her gaze. "I'm not doing it for you. I'm doing it because I want to make sure we all get home alive." Jason clapped him on the shoulder. "We appreciate it. Now let's see if we can learn a little more." With the new safeguards in place, Emily resumed her experiments. She introduced various stimuli to test the organism's reactions: flashing lights, recorded sounds, and even mild electrical currents. Each time, the glowing mass adapted, absorbing the input and replicating it in its own unique way. When exposed to a low hum, it vibrated in sync with the frequency. When presented with a bright flash of light, it dimmed its glow momentarily, as if shielding itself. But then, something unexpected happened. During one test, Emily played a recording of human speech, a clip of Captain Laura Hayes giving a routine mission update. The organism reacted instantly, its glow intensifying as it formed a vague humanoid shape. A figure raised an arm, pointing directly at Emily. "What's it doing now?" Jason asked, stepping closer. "I think it recognizes the voice." "Emily," said, her voice tinged with awe. "Maybe it associates it with authority or leadership." The organism pulsed again, this time forming a question mark out of its glowing tendrils. The symbol hovered briefly before dissolving back into the main mass. "It's asking a question," Emily realized, her eyes widening. "It wants to know something." "What?" Jason pressed. "What does it want to know?" Before Emily could respond, the organism shifted again, creating a series of symbols that resembled Earth's continents. The shapes were crude but unmistakable. "It's showing us Earth," Emily whispered, her voice trembling. "It knows where we're from." Jason's jaw tightened. "How? Did someone mention Earth during our broadcasts?" "No," Emily said, shaking her head. "Not unless it picked up the information from us somehow. Maybe it can read our thoughts, or at least interpret our emotions." "That's impossible," Alex interjected sharply. "No organism can do that. Not without advanced technology." "Yet here we are," Jason said dryly, dealing with something that defies explanation. The organism pulsed again, drawing their attention. This time, it formed a single word in glowing letters. "Help." Emily froze, staring at the message. "It's asking for help." "For what?" Alex demanded. "Oh!" "To take over the ship? To destroy us?" "No," Emily said firmly. "I don't think so. Look at how it's behaving. It's cautious, almost desperate. Whatever it needs. It's important enough for it to try communicating with us." Jason exhaled sharply, rubbing the back of his neck. "Okay, let's assume it's telling the truth. What happens if we give it what it wants? Will it leave us alone? And go back to wherever it came from?" "I don't know," Emily admitted. "But refusing to help might make it hostile. And if it turns against us." She didn't finish the sentence. They all understood the stakes. If the organism decided to fight back, they wouldn't stand a chance. For a long moment, none of them spoke. The glowing mass remained still, its message hovering in the air like a plea. Finally, Jason broke the silence. "We help it," he said decisively. "But we do it on our terms. We find out exactly what it needs, and we make sure it doesn't put the ship or the crew in danger." Emily nodded, relief washing over her. "Thank you. I think this is the right call." Alex sighed, shaking his head. "I hope you're right, because if this goes sideways, we're all dead." With that, the three of them turned their attention back to the organism, determined to uncover its secrets and, perhaps, save themselves in the process. But deep down, each of them wondered whether they were making the smartest choice or the biggest mistake of their lives. Document. Part 1. The sun hung low in the sky, casting long shadows across the small Midwestern town of Maplewood. It was a quiet place, the kind where everyone knew each other's names and life moved at a slow, predictable pace. The streets were lined with modest houses, their lawns neatly trimmed, and the air carried the faint smell of freshly cut grass. Children played on swings in the park while older folks sat on porches, sipping lemonade and chatting about nothing in particular. Everything seemed ordinary until it wasn't. A strange hum filled the air, growing louder by the second. At first, people thought it might be an airplane flying too low, or perhaps some new machinery being tested at the factory on the outskirts of town. But then they looked up and saw it a massive, gleaming object descending from the heavens. It wasn't like anything anyone had ever seen before. The ship shimmered, as if made of liquid metal, its surface reflecting the sunlight in dazzling patterns. As it hovered above the center of town, the ground trembled slightly, sending ripples through puddles left behind by last night's rain. The townsfolk froze, staring open-mouthed at the spectacle. Some clutched their chests, hearts pounding. Others grabbed their children and pulled them close. No one spoke. The silence was deafening, broken only by the steady hum of the alien craft. Then, just as suddenly as it had appeared, the ship stopped moving. For a moment, it simply floated there, suspended in midair, as though studying the tiny humans below, and then it landed, with a soft thud that sent dust swirling into the air. The vessel settled onto the main street right in front of the old diner, where locals often gathered for coffee and pie. A section of the ship's smooth surface began to shift, melting away like ice under the sun. Through the opening stepped 6 towering figures, their forms unmistakably alien. They stood nearly 8 feet tall, their limbs long and slender, their skin a deep shade of purple that glowed faintly in the fading daylight. Their eyes were large and luminous, glowing like twin moons against their dark faces. They wore sleek, form-fitting suits adorned with intricate patterns that pulsed faintly with light. As though alive, the crowd instinctively took a step back, creating a wide circle around the visitors. The aliens scanned the scene with calm indifference, their glowing eyes taking in every detail. One of them stepped forward, clearly the leader. His presence commanded attention, not just because of his height, but because of the way he carried himself with an air of absolute confidence, as though he owned the very ground beneath his feet. "I am Zorvex," he announced, his voice deep and resonant, carrying a strange musical quality. Though his lips didn't move in the way human mouths did when speaking, the words came out perfectly clear, as though translated directly into everyone's minds. "We are the Zyran Collective, explorers of the cosmos and masters of countless worlds." His tone was matter-of-fact, devoid of emotion, yet it carried an unmistakable edge of arrogance. He paused, letting his words sink in, before continuing. "Your species has been observed from afar. We have deemed your planet worthy of evaluation. If you meet our standards, you may join our alliance. If not," he let the sentence trail off, leaving the implication hanging heavily in the air. No one responded. The townspeople exchanged uneasy glances, unsure what to make of this unexpected visit. Finally, a man stepped forward. He was tall and broad-shouldered, with calloused hands and grease-stained jeans, the kind of guy who spent most days working on cars in his garage. His name was Jake Carter, and though he wasn't anyone special, he had a reputation for being level-headed and quick-thinking. Jake cleared his throat and extended a hand toward Zorvex. "Welcome to Earth," he said, trying to sound friendly. Despite the knot tightening in his stomach, "I'm Jake. Nice to meet you." Zorvex stared at Jake's outstretched hand, his expression unreadable. After a moment, he tilted his head slightly as though amused. "Primitive gestures mean little to us," he said dismissively. "I will humor you." He reached out with one of his elongated arms, his fingers brushing briefly against Jake's palm. The touch was cold and unnervingly smooth, like polished stone. Jake resisted the urge to pull away, forcing himself to smile instead. "So, what brings you here?" he asked, hoping to break the tension. "We seek knowledge," Zorvax replied, "and conquest, should it prove necessary. Tell me, human, what can your species offer that we do not already possess?" Before Jake could answer, another voice chimed in. Maybe we can start with introductions, said Rachel Monroe, a young woman standing near the edge of the crowd. She was visiting her hometown after spending years studying biology at a university in Chicago. Her curly brown hair framed her face, and her green eyes sparkled with curiosity. Unlike many of the others, she didn't seem afraid, just deeply intrigued. Zorvex turned his gaze toward her, his glowing eyes narrowing slightly. "You dare interrupt me?" he asked, his tone sharp. Rachel raised her hands in a placating gesture. "Not interrupt. Exactly, just suggest a more collaborative approach. If you're evaluating us, shouldn't we get to know each other first?" For a moment, Zorvex looked taken aback, as though unaccustomed to being challenged. Then he straightened, regaining his composure. "Very well," he said stiffly. "Introduce yourselves if you must. Do not waste our time." One by one, the townspeople began introducing themselves, their voices shaky but determined. There was Mr. Peterson, the retired schoolteacher, Maria Lopez, who ran the bakery downtown, and Billy Harper, a teenager clutching his skateboard like a lifeline. Each person offered their name and a brief description of what they did, though it was clear the aliens weren't impressed. When it was Jake's turn again, he hesitated, choosing his words carefully. "I fix things," he said simply. "Cars, trucks, tractors, you name it. If it's broken, I make it work again." Zorvex gave him a dismissive glance. "Repairing primitive machines is hardly noteworthy. Surely your species must have greater accomplishments to boast of." Jake frowned, feeling a flicker of irritation. "Maybe so," he said. "But sometimes fixing something old is better than building something new. You'd be surprised what you can learn from the past." The alien leader cocked his head, studying Jake with renewed interest. "Perhaps," he said slowly, "but actions speak louder than words. Show us proof of your worth, human. Press. You so prepared to face the consequences?" As the crowd murmured nervously, Jake felt a weight settle over him. This wasn't just about Maplewood anymore. These aliens weren't here to chat, they were here to judge. And if humanity failed their test, the consequences could be catastrophic. Still, Jake couldn't help but notice the tiniest hint of uncertainty in Zorvex's demeanor. Maybe, just maybe, there was a chance to turn this situation around. Little. Did anyone know Jake had an idea? An idea that might just change everything? Document. Part 2. The tension in the air was thick enough to cut with a knife. Jake stood there, his mind racing as he tried to figure out how to respond to Zorvex's challenge. The alien leader's glowing eyes seemed to bore into him, waiting for an answer. Around them, the townsfolk shifted uneasily, their faces etched with worry. Some clutched their children closer, while others whispered nervously to one another. No one knew what to expect next. Jake took a deep breath, trying to steady himself. He wasn't a scientist or a politician, just a mechanic who fixed broken things for a living. But somehow in that moment, he felt like it was up to him to step up. "All right," he said finally, his voice calm but firm. "If you want proof of what we're capable of, we'll show you. Fair warning, it might not be what you're expecting." Zorvex tilted his head slightly, his expression unreadable. "Explain yourself," he demanded. Jake glanced at Rachel, who gave him a small nod of encouragement. She had already proven herself unafraid to speak her mind, and now she seemed ready to back him up. Emboldened, Jake continued. "Give you a demonstration, a challenge, if you will. Each side gets to show off something they're proud of, something that defines them. At the end, you decide whether we're worth keeping around." For a moment, Zorvex didn't say anything. His glowing eyes scanned the crowd again, as if searching for any sign of deception. Finally, he let out a low, rumbling laugh. "A challenge? From primitives like you?" He shook his head, clearly amused. "Very well, we accept. But no, if your efforts displease us, your planet will pay the price." The weight of those words hung heavily over the group, but Jake refused to let fear take hold. Instead, he nodded firmly. "Fair enough, let's get started." Later that afternoon, the aliens set up what they called their demonstration in an open field on the outskirts of town. They cleared away trees and rocks with ease, using some kind of energy beam emitted from devices strapped to their wrists. Within minutes, the area was transformed into a flat, smooth surface, gleaming under the sun. The townspeople gathered, cautiously at the edges of the field, watching as the aliens prepared their display. When everything was ready, Zorvek stepped forward once more, his towering frame casting a long shadow across the ground. "Behold," he announced, raising one arm dramatically. A shimmering portal appeared in front of him, rippling like liquid glass. Through it, the humans could see images of sprawling cities floating high above clouds, machines that assembled themselves without human intervention, and weapons capable of obliterating entire planets with a single blast. "These are our achievements," Zorvex declared, his voice filled with pride. "Cities that defy gravity, machines that replicate endlessly, weapons that ensure no enemy can stand against us. This is the power of the Zyran Collective." The townsfolk stared in stunned silence. Children gawked wide-eyed at the floating cities, while adults exchanged uneasy glances. Even Jake found himself momentarily awestruck by the sheer scale of what the aliens had created. It was clear that humanity couldn't compete with such advanced technology, at least not directly. But then Rachel leaned over and whispered something in Jake's ear. Her words were soft, but they carried a spark of inspiration. "They think brute force and fancy gadgets are all that matter," she murmured. "But they don't understand what makes us truly unique. Show them something they've never seen before." Jake nodded slowly, a plan beginning to form in his mind. When Zorvex finished his presentation and turned to the crowd expectantly, Jake stepped forward again. "Impressive," he admitted, earning a smug smirk from the alien leader. "But I think it's our turn now." The next morning, Jake led the aliens to a quiet farm on the edge of town. It belonged to Old Man Harris, a grizzled farmer in his 70s, who still worked the land every day, despite his age. The property was dotted with fields of corn and wheat, along with a few barns and pens housing various animals. Chickens clucked lazily in the yard, while cows grazed peacefully in the distance. "This is your great achievement?" Zorvex asked, his tone dripping with disdain. "Livestock. You call these creatures impressive?" Jake ignored the insult and walked toward one of the pens, where a large German shepherd named Max sat patiently. The dog wagged his tail when he saw Jake approaching, his ears perking up eagerly. "This is Max," Jake said, introducing the animal to the aliens. "He's trained to help find people lost in the wilderness, track down criminals, and even protect families. He's loyal, smart, and strong, because we taught him to be." At Jake's command, Max performed a series of tricks, barking loudly and jumping through hoops. The aliens watched silently, their expressions unreadable. When Max trotted over to Zorvex and sniffed his leg curiously, the alien leader recoiled, sharply, his glowing eyes narrowing in suspicion. "Why do you keep such dangerous beasts near you?" he demanded. "Would it not be safer to eliminate them?" Jake chuckled softly, shaking his head. "That's the thing," he said. "We don't need to eliminate them. We've learned how to live alongside them and even make them part of our lives. That's something you'd never understand." Zorvex frowned deeply, clearly unsettled by the idea. Before he could respond, Rachel stepped forward, gesturing toward the nearby pasture. "There's more," she said. "Come see this." She led the group to a fenced-in area where horses grazed quietly under the shade of a tree. Their coats gleamed in the sunlight, and their gentle movements exuded a sense of calm. Rachel explained how humans had tamed wild horses thousands of years ago, teaching them to carry riders, pull carts, and work alongside farmers. "These animals used to roam free, untamed, and unpredictable," she said. "To earn their trust, now they're our partners." Trelk, one of the younger aliens, stepped closer to the fence, his glowing eyes fixed on the horses. "How do you control them?" he asked, his voice tinged with curiosity. "What stops them from turning on you?" Rachel smiled faintly. "It's not about control," she said. "It's about respect. We treat them well, care for them, and in return, they choose to stay with us. It's a bond built on mutual trust." Zorvex scoffed, dismissing the explanation as irrelevant. But Jake noticed something interesting. Several of the other aliens, including Trelk, seemed genuinely intrigued. For the first time since their arrival, there was a crack in the aliens' armor of arrogance. As the day wore on, Jake and Rachel continued to guide the aliens through different parts of the farm, showing them goats, pigs, and chickens. Each time the aliens reacted with a mix of confusion and skepticism, unable to grasp why humans would bother coexisting with creatures that could potentially harm them. By the time evening fell, Zorvex looked increasingly frustrated, though he tried to hide it behind a mask of indifference. Finally, as the sun dipped below the horizon, painting the sky in shades of orange and pink, Jake decided to deliver the final piece of their demonstration. He led the group to a large pen at the far end of the property, where a massive bull named Thunder stood grazing. The animal's muscular frame and sharp horns made it clear that he was not to be trifled with. "This is Thunder," Jake said, standing confidently near the fence. "He's one of the strongest animals here. If he wanted to, he could charge right through that fence and trample anyone who got in his way. But he doesn't. Why? Because we've earned his trust stand, because we know how to handle him." To prove his point, Jake opened the gate and stepped inside the pen. Thunder raised his head, watching Jake warily as he approached. For a tense moment, the bull seemed ready to charge. But then Jake reached out a hand, letting Thunder sniff it. Slowly, the animal relaxed, lowering his head and allowing Jake to pat his side gently. The aliens stared in disbelief. Even Zorvex looked shaken, though he quickly masked it with a scowl. "You claim this is your greatest accomplishment?" he sneered, taming beasts. "Pathetic." Jake shrugged, unfazed by the insult. "Maybe it doesn't look like much compared to your floating cities and self-replicating machines," he said. "But think about it. We didn't conquer these animals, we worked with them. We turned predators and competitors into allies. That's something you'll never understand because you're too busy destroying everything that scares you." For the first time, Zorvex didn't have an immediate retort. His glowing eyes flickered uncertainly, and for a brief moment, Jake thought he saw a hint of doubt cross the alien leader's face. Whatever happened next, one thing was certain. The aliens' confidence had been shaken, and humanity still had a fighting chance. Document. Part 4. The air was thick with tension as the aliens stood frozen, their glowing eyes fixed on Simba, the massive lion. The big cat moved lazily, his golden coat shimmering under the sunlight as he padded around the enclosure. Chol remained calm, her hand resting gently on Simba's broad head. She spoke softly to him, her voice soothing and steady. While the alien visitors exchanged uneasy glances, Zorvex finally broke the silence. His tone sharp but tinged with something new in certainty. "You claim this creature is dangerous," he said, pointing one elongated finger toward Simba. "Yet it allows you to touch it without resistance. Explain how such a thing is possible." Jake stepped forward, sensing an opening. "It's not about forcing him to obey," he said, his voice clear and confident. "It's about understanding him. We don't fight against nature, we work with it. When Simba first came here, he was injured and scared. The staff at the sanctuary spent months caring for him, feeding him, and earning his trust. Now he sees us as part of his family." Trelk tilted his head, studying Simba intently. "But why would you risk being near such a beast? Surely there are safer ways to spend your time?" Rachel smiled faintly, turning to face the aliens. "Because it's worth it," she replied. "Simba isn't just a predator, he's a symbol of strength and resilience. By learning to live alongside animals like him, we prove that we're adaptable. We don't run from challenges, find ways to overcome them." Zorvex let out a low growl, clearly irritated by the explanation. "Your attachment to these creatures is perplexing," he admitted. "In our society, predators are exterminated. They serve no purpose other than destruction. To allow them to exist among you is illogical." "That's where you're wrong," Jake countered. "Predators keep the balance. Without them, ecosystems collapse. You think wiping them out makes you stronger, but all it does is weaken the world around you. We've learned to coexist with predators because they make us better. They teach us patience, respect, and survival." The alien leader narrowed his glowing eyes, his expression unreadable. For a moment, no one spoke. Then Zorvex gestured toward Simba with a dismissive wave of his hand. Enough of this. Show us another example or admit that your so-called achievements are nothing more than sentimental nonsense. Determined to press their advantage, Jake and Rachel led the group deeper into the wildlife sanctuary. Their next stop was a large aviary filled with birds of prey, hawks, eagles, and falcons. The air inside buzzed with the sound of flapping wings, and the sharp cries of the raptors echoed off the walls. At the center of the space stood a handler named Linda, a wiry woman in her 50s who had spent decades training birds for conservation efforts. Linda, can you show the aliens what these birds can do? Linda nodded, her eyes gleaming with excitement. I've got just the bird for the job, she said, whistling sharply. Majestic bald eagles swooped down, landing gracefully on her gloved arm. The bird's piercing gaze swept over the crowd, its talons flexing slightly as it adjusted its footing. This is Athena, Linda announced, holding the eagle up for everyone to see. She's one of the fastest hunters in the sky. Wild. She could spot a rabbit from hundreds of feet away and dive at speeds of over 100 miles per hour to catch it. But here, she works with us to track endangered species and monitor ecosystems. The aliens watched in silence as Linda removed a small piece of meat from her pocket and held it out to Athena. The eagle leaned forward, snatching the treat delicately, with her curved beak before returning to her perch. The entire interaction lasted only seconds, but it left a lasting impression. How do you control such a creature? Varn, one of the quieter aliens, asked hesitantly. His glowing eyes were wide with curiosity. Move so quickly it could easily harm you. We don't control her, Linda explained patiently. We train her. It takes time and effort, but once she understands that we mean no harm, she chooses to cooperate. She knows we'll take care of her, just like she helps us when we need her. And what happens if she decides not to? Obey? What then? Linda shrugged, unfazed by the question. Then we respect her decision. These birds aren't machines. They're living beings with their own instincts and desires. If Athena doesn't want to fly, we don't force her. Trust has to go both ways. Zorvex frowned deeply, clearly uncomfortable with the idea. Reliance on cooperation seems inefficient, he muttered. Why waste time building relationships when you could simply dominate? Because domination breaks things, Rachel interjected firmly. Cooperation strengthens them. Look at Athena, she's free to leave whenever she wants, but she stays because she trusts us. That kind of bond is stronger than any weapon or machine. As the day wore on, Jake and Rachel continued to guide the aliens through the sanctuary, introducing them to more animals and explaining humanity's unique relationship with each one. They showed them wolves that had been rehabilitated after being abandoned by humans, bears that roamed freely within protected areas, and even snakes that played a vital role in controlling pest populations. With every demonstration, the aliens grew quieter, their initial arrogance giving way to unease. By late afternoon, the group reached the edge of a dense forest where a team of researchers was conducting a study on local wildlife. One of the scientists, a young man named Eric, greeted them warmly and invited the aliens to observe a tracking exercise. Using radio collars and drones, the team monitored a pack of coyotes moving through the woods, studying their behavior and interactions with the environment. These animals are wild, Eric explained as the group gathered around a portable screen displaying footage of the coyotes. They hunt, they roam, and they avoid humans most of the time. But by observing them, we learn how to protect both them and ourselves. It's a delicate balance, but one that benefits everyone involved. Varn leaned closer to the screen, his glowing eyes reflecting the images of the sleek, agile coyotes darting between trees. You say you protect them, he said slowly, but what stops them from attacking you? Eric smiled faintly. They usually avoid us unless provoked. And even if they did attack, we'd handle it carefully. Killing them wouldn't solve anything, it would only disrupt the ecosystem. Every animal has a role to play whether we realize it or not. Zorvex crossed his arms, his frustration mounting. This obsession with preservation baffles me, he snapped. Your species clings to outdated notions of harmony when true progress requires sacrifice. Nature exists to be conquered, not coddled. Jake stepped forward, his jaw tightening. That's where you're wrong, he said evenly. Conquering nature doesn't make you strong. It makes you blind. You destroy everything that scares you instead of learning from it. We've survived because we adapt, because we find ways to live with the world, not against it. For a moment, Zorvex looked like he might argue further, but then he stopped himself. His glowing eyes flickered uncertainly, and for the first time, Jake saw a crack in the alien leader's unshakable confidence. Whatever doubts had been growing throughout the day were now impossible to ignore. As the sun dipped below the horizon, casting long shadows across the forest floor, Jake turned to the aliens with a determined look. Tomorrow, he said, we'll show you something even bigger. Something that proves once and for all that humanity isn't afraid of danger. We thrive because of it. Zorvex didn't respond immediately. Instead, he stared at Jake, his expression unreadable. Finally, he gave a curt nod. Very well, he said stiffly. We will return. But know this, if your final demonstration fails to impress us, your planet's fate will be sealed. With that, the aliens boarded their ship and ascended into the night sky, leaving Jake and the others standing in silence. Despite the looming threat, there was a sense of hope in the air. The aliens' confidence had been shaken. Humanity still had one last chance to turn the tide. Document Part 5. The morning sun rose slowly over the horizon, painting the sky in shades of orange and pink. The air was crisp and cool, carrying the faint scent of pine from the nearby woods. Jake and Rachel stood outside the wildlife sanctuary, waiting anxiously for the aliens to return. Around them, the townsfolk bustled about, preparing for what would likely be their final opportunity to prove humanity's worth. Everyone knew the stake's failure meant the end of life as they knew it. When the alien ship finally descended into the clearing, its metallic surface gleaming under the sunlight, the crowd fell silent. Zorvex emerged first, his towering frame exuding an aura of impatience. His glowing eyes scanned the group before settling on Jake. You promised us something significant, he said sharply. Do not waste our time with trivialities. Jake nodded firmly, meeting the alien leader's gaze without flinching. Follow me, he said simply, turning toward a dirt path that led deeper into the forest. The aliens hesitated for a moment before following, their long strides eating up the distance quickly. The path wound through dense trees until it opened into a wide clearing. In the center stood a massive bear named Bruno, his dark fur glistening in the sunlight. He was easily 10 feet tall when standing on his hind legs, with powerful muscles rippling beneath his coat. Despite his intimidating size, Bruno moved with surprising grace. Sniffing curiously at the air as the group approached, "This is Bruno," Jake announced, stepping confidently into the clearing. He's a grizzly bear, one of the largest predators on Earth. In the wild, he could crush a car with his bare paws or outrun most humans in seconds. But here, he's learned to trust us. Zorvex raised an eyebrow, clearly skeptical. Trust, he repeated, his tone dripping with sarcasm. How exactly does one earn the trust of such a creature? Without answering, Jake walked closer. To Bruno, holding out a jar of honey. The bear sniffed the air again, his nose twitching as he caught the sweet scent. Slowly, he lumbered forward, lowering his massive head to inspect the offering. Satisfied, he reached out with his tongue, licking the honey directly from the jar, while Jake stood calmly beside him. The aliens watched in stunned silence, their glowing eyes wide with disbelief. Even Zorvex seemed momentarily speechless. Finally, Trelk stepped forward, his voice trembling slightly. This defies logic. How can you stand so close to such a beast without fear? Jake shrugged, scratching Bruno gently behind the ears. Fear doesn't help you survive. It holds you back. We don't run from danger. We'll face it. Over thousands of years, we've learned how to live alongside animals like Bruno. We respect them. And in return, they learn to tolerate us. Rachel stepped forward, her green eyes locking onto the aliens. Think about it, she said. You've wiped out all your predators because you're afraid of them. But fear only makes you weaker. Humanity's grown stronger by embracing the things that scare us. That's why we've survived and thrived for so long. Zorvex scowled clearly. Unsettled by the explanation, "Your methods are unconventional," he admitted reluctantly. "But they still pale in comparison to our technological achievements. What use is a bear against weapons capable of destroying entire planets?" Jake smiled faintly, sensing the alien leader's growing unease. "Maybe you're right," he said. "A single bear might not stand a chance against your fancy gadgets. But have you ever stopped to think about what happens when fear isn't part of the equation? When someone or something isn't afraid of you anymore?" Before Zorvex could respond, Jake turned back to Bruno and gave a soft whistle. The bear immediately straightened, rising onto his hind legs to tower over the group. His deep growl rumbled through the clearing, sending shivers down the spines of everyone present, including the aliens. For a moment, no one moved. Then Zorvex took a cautious step forward, his glowing eyes fixed on Bruno. "Impressive," he muttered, though his voice wavered slightly. "But I doubt this animal would hesitate to attack if provoked." To everyone's surprise, Jake stepped aside, leaving himself between Zorvex and Bruno. "Try it," he said, gesturing toward the bear. "See for yourself." Zorvex hesitated, clearly torn between curiosity and caution. After a tense pause, he extended one elongated arm, reaching cautiously toward Bruno. The bear let out a low rumble, his sharp teeth glinting in the sunlight. Just as Zorvex's fingers brushed against Bruno's fur, Jake intervened, placing a firm hand on the bear's shoulder. "Easy, big guy," he murmured, patting Bruno reassuringly. The bear relaxed instantly, letting out a soft huff before dropping back onto all fours. Zorvex stumbled backward, his glowing eyes wide with shock. "You see," Jake said, turning to face the aliens, "we don't need weapons to survive. We've made peace with the very things that could destroy us. That's something you'll never understand, not until you stop running from your fears." Later that afternoon, the group returned to the sanctuary's main compound, where researchers had set up a makeshift exhibit showcasing humanity's history with predators. Posters and videos lined the walls, detailing everything from early humans hunting alongside wolves to modern-day conservation efforts aimed at protecting endangered species. Rachel guided the aliens through the display, pointing out key moments in human history. "It wasn't always easy," she explained. "There were times when we hunted these animals almost to extinction. But over time, we realized that killing them didn't make us safer. It just made the world more unstable, so we changed. Started finding ways to coexist instead of dominate." Trelk lingered near a video showing divers swimming alongside sharks in the ocean. "These creatures are known for their aggression," he said, his voice tinged with awe. "Yet humans swim among them without fear. How is this possible?" "It's called understanding," Rachel replied. "Sharks aren't mindless killers. They're intelligent hunters who play a vital role in marine ecosystems. By learning their behavior and respecting their space, we've found ways to interact safely. It's not about conquering them, about working with them." Varn, another alien, stepped closer, his expression thoughtful. "And what of those who refuse to cooperate? What do you do when an animal cannot atour? Will not be tamed?" Rachel hesitated, choosing her words carefully. "Sometimes there's no choice but to protect ourselves. But even then we try to minimize harm. Killing should always be a last resort. Every life has value than the lives of predators." Zorvex listened silently, his glowing eyes narrowing slightly. For once he didn't interrupt or mock. Instead, he seemed lost in thought, his usual arrogance replaced by a quiet uncertainty. As the day drew to a close, Jake gathered the townsfolk and researchers for a final discussion. They sat in a circle under the stars, their faces illuminated by the flickering light of a small campfire. The mood was somber, but hopeful. Everyone knew they had pushed the aliens to reconsider their assumptions about humanity. "What happens now?" Maria asked, breaking the silence. Her hands trembled slightly as she clutched a mug of tea. "Do you think they'll leave us alone?" Jake sighed, rubbing the back of his neck. "I don't know," he admitted. "But I do know this. We've shown them something they didn't expect, something they can't ignore. If nothing else, we've planted a seed of doubt in their minds. Old Man Harris nodded slowly, stroking his gray beard. Doubt is a powerful thing, he said, especially for someone like Zorvex, who prides himself on being superior. Once that crack forms, it's only a matter of time before the whole foundation starts to crumble. Rachel smiled faintly, leaning back against a log. Let's hope so, she said. Because if they decide we're too dangerous or too unpredictable, they might just walk away. And that's exactly what we want. Billy, the teenager who had been quiet throughout most of the discussions, spoke up suddenly. What if they come back? What if they bring reinforcements? Or try to conquer us anyway? Jake met the boy's worried gaze, his expression steady. Then we fight, he said simply. Not with weapons, but with the same thing that's kept us alive for thousands of years. Our ability to adapt. To find strength in cooperation instead of domination. The group fell silent, each person lost in their own thoughts. Above them, the stars twinkled brightly, reminding them of the vastness of the universe and the resilience of the tiny planet they called home. Whatever happened next, one thing was certain. Humanity had proven it wasn't afraid to face the unknown. Sometimes, that was enough. Document, Part 6. The alien ship hovered silently above the clearing, its metallic surface reflecting the dim light of the moon. Inside, the atmosphere was tense. Darvex paced back and forth across the smooth floor of the main chamber, his glowing eyes darting between the other members of the Zyran collective. None of them spoke. The silence was heavy with unspoken questions and growing unease. Trelk finally broke the quiet, his voice low and hesitant. Commander, he began, choosing his words carefully, I must ask, what are your thoughts on these humans? Their methods are unlike anything we have encountered before. Zorvex stopped pacing and turned to face Trelk, his expression unreadable. For a moment, he didn't respond, as if weighing whether or not to share his thoughts. Finally, he let out a frustrated growl. Their methods are primitive, he snapped. They cling to outdated notions of harmony and balance as though nature is something to be preserved rather than conquered. It is illogical. But Trelk hesitated, glancing at the others for support. When no one spoke, he continued, but what if their approach has merit? What if their ability to coexist with predators makes them stronger, not weaker? Zorvex's eyes narrowed and his tone grew colder. Stronger. They cower before beasts that could kill them in an instant. They waste resources caring for animals that serve no practical purpose. How does this make them strong? Varn, who had been quietly observing the exchange, stepped forward cautiously. His usual calm demeanor betrayed a flicker of uncertainty. Perhaps strength does not always come from domination, he suggested softly. Perhaps it comes from understanding. The humans seem to thrive because they adapt, not because they destroy. Zorvex whirled around to face Varn, his glowing eyes blazing with anger. Enough, he barked. You speak as though our way is flawed, as though we are inferior to these primitives? No, Varn replied quickly, holding up his hands, in a placating gesture. That is not what I mean. But consider this. They live among creatures that could easily overpower them, yet they choose not to fear them. Instead, they find ways to cooperate. Is that not remarkable? The room fell silent again, as Zorvex processed Varn's words. He looked away, his jaw tightening. For all his bluster, there was a part of him that couldn't deny the uneasiness. Gnawing at the edges of his mind, these humans were different, not just in how they lived, but in how they thought. Their willingness to embrace danger instead of running from it challenged everything the Zyran collective believed about survival and progress. After a long pause, Zorvex turned back to the group. Very well, he said stiffly. Let us entertain. This idea for a moment, suppose their methods have some value. What then? Should we abandon our principles and adopt their sentimentality? No, Trelk answered firmly. But perhaps we should reconsider our assumptions. What if their bond with predators makes them more resilient than we realized? What if their so-called weakness is actually a strength? Zorvex clenched his fists, visibly struggling to maintain control. Fine, he said through gritted teeth. We will observe further. But mark my words, if they prove unworthy, We will act decisively. There can be no hesitation. Back on Earth, Jake and Rachel sat by the campfire outside the wildlife sanctuary, discussing the day's events with the townsfolk. The flames crackled softly, casting flickering shadows across their faces. Everyone seemed exhausted but hopeful, buoyed by the knowledge that they had shaken the aliens' confidence, if only slightly. They're starting to doubt themselves, Rachel said, her voice tinged with cautious optimism. Did you see the way Zorvex reacted when Bruno roared? He was scared. Not just surprised, actually scared. Jake nodded, poking at the fire with a stick. Yeah, I noticed. Trell kept asking questions like he genuinely wanted to understand. That's a good sign, right? Old Man Harris leaned forward, his weathered face illuminated by the firelight. It's more than a good sign, he said gruffly. It means they're vulnerable. For all their fancy gadgets and big talk, they've never faced anything like us. They don't know how to handle a species that refuses to bow down. Maria Lopez, who had remained quiet for most of the evening, spoke up suddenly. But what happens if they decide we're too dangerous? What if they think we're a threat to their empire, or whatever it is they're building? Billy Harper, the teenager, chimed in nervously. Yeah, and what if they bring reinforcements? We can't fight off an entire fleet of alien ships. Sighed, leaning back against a log. We don't have to fight them, not directly anyway. Our goal isn't to win a war. It's to show them that humanity is worth preserving. If we can make them question their own beliefs, maybe they'll leave us alone. Rachel nodded in agreement. Exactly. Fear is their biggest weapon, but it's also their biggest weakness. Once they realize we're not afraid of them more, their technology, they lose their advantage. Mr. Peterson adjusted his glasses, looking thoughtful. And let's not forget what we've shown them so far. They've seen lions, bears, sharks, even eagles. Each time they've grown more uneasy. Why? Because they don't understand how we live alongside predators without destroying them. Because they've never had to, Jake added. They wiped out all their predators thousands of years ago. They don't know what it's like to face danger every day and survive. Later that night, after the fire had burned down too, embers, Jake found himself unable to sleep. He wandered toward the edge of the clearing, where the forest loomed dark and silent under the starry sky. The air was cool and still, broken only by the distant hoot of an owl. As he stood there, lost. In thought, he heard footsteps behind him. It was Rachel. She joined him quietly, wrapping her arms around herself to ward off the chill. Can't sleep either? She asked softly. Jake shook his head. Too much on my mind, he admitted. I keep thinking about what Zorvex said, that our methods are primitive. Maybe he's right. Maybe we are simpler than them. But does that really matter? Rachel smiled faintly, gazing up at the stars. Not everything has to be complicated to be valuable, she said. Sometimes the simplest things are the strongest, like trust or cooperation. Weaknesses, they're choices, and they're what make us human. Jake nodded slowly, feeling a sense of resolve settle over him. Tomorrow, he said, his voice steady, we finish this. We show them exactly who we are and why they should. Leave us alone. Rachel placed a reassuring hand on his shoulder. We've got this, she said. No matter what happens, we've already won. Because we've made them doubt themselves. And that's the first step toward change. As they stood there together, the vastness of the universe stretching endlessly above them, Jake felt a spark of hope ignite within him. Humanity wasn't perfect, it never had been. But it was adaptable, resilient, and determined to survive. Sometimes, that was enough.